Hello, my dear friends of Agile Working, and welcome to Agile at Heart. Today is the first episode in English, and I'm super excited to share the virtual recording studio with Daisy Onubogu. Daisy works as a mental health coach and consultant at RoomPriceGenie, which is a startup in tech. And despite her young age of only 30 years, she has an impressive track record. She worked, amongst other things, as head of network, oversaw various diversity and inclusion initiatives, managed a fund for Black founders, and was COO at a non-profit that advanced diversity and inclusion in the venture capital industry. And there's even more to her rich career, for example, curating main stage speakers, being a speaker herself at various international conferences like Slush, Lesbians Who Tech, etc., and she was also featured in publications, for example, in The Independent. When I heard all this, I couldn't imagine when she sleeps, but she even made room for writing a book, which is soon going to be published. Here's a very short summary of the topics that we will talk about in this episode. Daisy tells us about her view on how teams and individuals can grow and how employees can create a safe workplace environment. Her key takeaways are: creativity and effective problem solving are a result of good mental health, and she talks about how this can be nurtured in the workplace. Growing as a person is something that doesn't happen just accidentally. It needs time to reflect on things that happened. Only then many things become real and can be appreciated or changed. Taking the time to reflect is already the key to create a healthy workspace where everyone can feel safe. She also talks about her very personal perspective on human behavior and how her neurodivergent background shaped her career. We almost get a little philosophical, but definitely deep and real talky, so to say. So it's really worth listening through it till the end, because we will also talk about her book, which is about the very unique yet relatable journeys of 4 millennials dealing with the pandemic before and afterwards. So dive right in and enjoy listening to my fascinating guest, Daisy Onubogu. My name is Lisa Morgner, and I'm glad that you are joining me on this episode. Hi, Daisy. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, and welcome.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here. I'm very excited. It's been ages since I got to talk.
At all.
Thankfully, not at all, but I guess in a semi-public fashion. Get
Yeah.
on my soapbox, as my mom used to say, and yap.
So it's really nice that you are here today and joined some of your experiences with us. So we're going to talk about basically your role and your work, because it's quite exceptional what you do, and probably something that is not found in many companies. So you work as a mental health coach and counselor. And well, before we jump right in, maybe you can describe your role a little and what do you do in your everyday work?
Yes, happy to. And you're right, it's a very cool job, and I'm very privileged to have it. In a nutshell, so I'm a people and culture specialist at RoomPriceGenie. And so that means that my job is to try and think about how to make the how people collaborating together in this organization work really, really well. And so in practice, that really means a lot of in-house coaching and in-house counseling, so that I can, in the simplest sense, like help people work through emotionally complex things. And sometimes that is, one to one, where there is some friction with a colleague, some piece of feedback that doesn't quite make sense to you, feeling misunderstood by your manager, any sort of like impasse that people have reached where something is off, the vibes are off, and they need a little assistance in figuring out what's going on and moving forward. Sometimes that's just the individual on their own requiring support. Maybe it's not work related, but life be lifing and it's getting a lot. And even just the space to either vent about that, process, or to make a plan. So that's where sort of the coaching element comes in, helping people figure out how to put one foot in front of the other while life is doing the most. And also, you still have to work to a degree. So that can be planning how to stagger their time off, or planning how to communicate with their manager what they need to, or how to let maybe the rest of their team know about sensitive situations that are playing out in their personal life. So that kind of support. And then Some of it is also sort of proactive rather than reactive. So thinking about building people's emotional intelligence, building their stress resilience. So that can be workshops. Our managers have to meet, regularly for mastermind discussions that I facilitate. So sometimes they are just safe space sharing for challenges that are going on with them so that they can work together on those solutions, but even just to witness each other and know that everyone's kind of going through the same things, or at least have been in the past or will go in the future, as well as just like crowdsourcing solutions for some of those. And sometimes they're discussion focused, like let's dive deeper into conflict resolution and talk about those, or let's dive deeper into power and how we think about that as a subject. And so it's the coolest job ever, really. And then the only thing that sits outside the sort of coaching and counseling is, I guess, like creatively coming up with like activations or events or anything that will deepen the bonds between people, the connections between people, or help people feel more included, or people feel like they're getting more out of being a part of the team. So that's maybe things like figuring out how we weave volunteering into our offsites when we meet, or planning like a volunteer day as part of the International Volunteering Day in December, or coming up with a cultural celebration calendar so everybody can put like 1 to 3 things that they want to see highlighted, and that way we get a whole calendar that has everything from Pride and Hanukkah to just also like specific political movements that are celebrated. Like there's some feminist holidays that people have put in there, or day of celebration. So it's really cool. I guess getting to just essentially experiment with the only North Star being how do you make people like feel better and do better in a social sense.
Wow, I mean, that's such a variety of topics that you're covering only in these few minutes where you described your work, and I'm sure there's even more to it. So, did I get it correctly that you work on individual level and also on team level, or is it mostly individual level?
Right now, it's kind of split evenly between individual and team, and I think that's also because I got to design it a little bit. So I came in knowing that this is what I wanted to hopefully do, but I was also very aware that it would only make sense if there was some pull also from my environment and if it was needed. And so I set out kind of scoping out what I thought the role would break down into. And so I was like, okay, it should be one-to-one support. There should be some group stuff, and then there should be some like kind of one-to-many, either content things, etc. And so thinking about how to set those up meant first thinking about how to invite more one-to-ones, and that was things like going out, sort of winning people's trust to a degree, and then also creating some tools. Like we have a reflection survey, like a type form, and it's nicely designed, and this doodle of a genie with a mirror holds you through or walks you through the reflection, and you check in with your mind and body, and also check in with the sort of open topics that are occupying you at the moment, just to prompt you to see, is there anything you could need to talk about or need support with? And if so, then the next thing will prompt you to sort of book time in with the Calendly. And that got a lot of the one-to-ones. But then I was like, okay, there should be some group stuff, but where would that work? And that was where the mastermind idea came up at a time when we were promoting a lot of people into management roles. And it just sort of came together really nicely of like, oh, this is perfect. Here's a group of people with something in common who could benefit from collectively working on that subject. And then also we wanted something non-managerial to happen so that it would only be benefiting that class. And that was where the sort of team workshops came up as well. And so we've rolled that out now to 2 so far. We're going to keep going around the company. And it's literally just like either maybe a month or quarterly get together, depending on the team's preference, to do nothing but just check in on the sort of the collaboration across the team, or the vibes in the team. And everybody talks about highlights or lowlights of collaboration, talks about moments of either asking for help or giving help, moments of sort of shared space together, or just sometimes to come together and work on a specific topic. And so if there's been an exit, for instance, recently in the team, coming together to talk about, everyone's on the same page, does everyone feel comfortable about understanding why it happened or that it made sense, do they have any questions, that kind of thing. And so a space where recurringly the team can gather to just check in on being a team, and unplug anything that needs to be unplugged, and develop deeper. So the time roughly, I think, probably breaks down to about half on one-to-one things and half on group things.
So what you last talked about reminds me really much of retrospectives that we do in agile teams. So almost like every 2 or every 3 weeks. So basically after each sprint, you check in what did go well, what didn't go well, do we have problems, do we need actions, like the small improvements that we can do. So I think it's so healthy to do it for both individual level and also team level. I don't understand how people work differently without it.
I think people don't realize what they're missing until they start doing it. And when you start doing things like this, then something becomes really clear. And you hear this actually a lot in sort of like psychotherapy or in psychology or even just in neuroscience fields, that so much of what is experienced isn't actually apparent to an individual until they reflect. Because often when you are doing things, you aren't also like metacogniting at the same time and thinking about what you're doing or thinking about what you're doing or all the connections or how it plays out. You're just doing, putting one foot in front of the other, reacting as you need to. A lot of things happen on reflex and impulse, and it's only later then on reflection that the picture starts to become clear and you see clearly yourself and other people and why they were doing what they were doing. So it's almost like it's not real until you reflect. It doesn't exist, the story of
Hmm.
until you reflect. So then obviously you can't improve on anything or even know how it went really until there is some kind of let's check in moment. So yeah, it's really cool to be somewhere where those ideas are sort of at least understood and respected, even if the like infrastructure or the behavior isn't there yet. So that I have a job to do, which is great, but at least there isn't resistance there because people are like, yeah, that makes sense, and you're right. Oh, I've done something like this before, whether it's being in agile teams before or experiencing management styles that have allowed for reflection and those sorts of things. A lot of appetite for what I'm doing at the company. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a nice atmosphere to work in where everybody grows and everybody is willing to open up at least to a certain point. So we will come back definitely to that at a
Yeah,
later point. So how do people actually how do you make them want to open up?
spectrum for sure, but yes.
Yeah. And this is also something that you already mentioned. So, what you really need for this job is trust, right? So that people actually go to Calendly and say, yes, I have this topic, I figured it out myself, and I want to talk to Daisy about it. So, how do you build this trust? Like, is it just you and people like you and trust you, or do you do it like proactively?
I think both. I think overall I'm very lucky that people do respond well to me, but at the same time, it is there are mechanics to it and I am doing things on purpose. And so and my someone was once like, you're like Machiavelli, but for good. And I'm like, oh, I will take that, I guess. So ultimately, for me at the beginning, I was like, okay, I know what it is that people would need to believe of me in order to come to me, because trust is really just what do you know or what do you think you know in relation to that, and then what does that mean for what you feel you can do. And so I was like, well, people will need to feel like they know I'm competent and they know I'm safe. And so I was like, I need to advertise that I'm able to do the things that I'm saying that I'm able to do, and also that I'm a safe person, that the things you say, you won't be met with judgment, you'll instead be met with affirmation, whatever that means, and support. And so I just went out on this campaign. Basically, I just behaved as though I was a politician, but the thing I'm campaigning for is to get across the truth of my safety and of my competence. And so I was like, I'll just be my own advertising. So I was really, really transparent about my own personal journey, about the sort of starting point of complexity that I came into the world with. Like full disclosure, I'm neurodivergent, and then also in experiencing the world as a neurodivergent person who was undiagnosed until adulthood, I then accumulated a bunch of mental illnesses and trying to sort of bridge that gap between how you actually function and what the world demands of you. And so it meant that I was like, I've had firsthand experience in supporting people through really hard things. I've supported me through really hard things. And then also here's all the ways in which this kind of work has always spilled into everything I've ever done, even if the formal title I was holding was something else. And being able to sort of share those anecdotes, share my personal stories, share the gap from how things used to be for me to how they are now. Really doing that whole I've been here, wherever here is for you, or something really close to it, and I'm now here, which is where you see now in front of you. And so I think it always comes down to that, and I think in a way I was very like I never had any doubt that I could do that in a way, because I think I've always had to do this with every room that I've ever gone into. I think to a degree, there has always been either ignorance about me and my capacities when I first enter a room, because I've often been the first of my kind, whatever that looks like. I've been in repeated situations where I was the first Black woman to do X, or to be in here, or the only one who was like me in the space, or just new because I kept moving so much. And so getting into a room and realizing, okay, nobody here knows me, nobody here knows what I can do, and nobody here really, believes in me or is all that interested in me. And I have to change that somehow. So what do we do? And so thinking really rapidly about how to assess the room I'm in, and where and what their starting point is of how they're perceiving me, and then what it would look like for them to get to the other side, and what they would need to learn in order to get there, and then how I can advertise that in a way that's effective, as opposed to in a way that has the reverse consequence, because people are tricky, and sometimes the
Mhm.
thing you're trying to get across, you will end up pushing them in the opposite direction if you do it in a way that's too heavy-handed, or in a way that gives people the ick, or whatever that might be. And I think I've had to do it so many times that, to a degree, it's a little bit of a game. It's a bit of a puzzle for me. It's something that I quite enjoy doing. Like, how do you come to understand the basis of someone's doubt, or their lack of understanding of you, and then what the kind of most efficient path is, to get to them seeing you as you, at least as you think you see yourself.
So with every time you enter a new group, a new job, a new country, whatever, you learn also more how people react, and also like what are misconceptions maybe, or like what people used to think about you, what you got like mirrored back in the past, and then you can still keep on working with it, and then refining your introduction, refining what you can tell about yourself, and maybe something you maybe hold up for later and share later and point, or something like that. So
Exactly. And I think, at the end of the day, one of the fun consolation prizes of being autistic is being able to be deeply obsessed with something, and then being able to hold like an absurd amount of information relative to that subject you're obsessed with. You hold almost nothing else. The rest of the range is useless and empty. But the part that is working is for fun facts about your favorite subject. And mine just happens to be people, or at least people's behavior, because that was certainly the thing that was most arrestingly confusing or intriguing or stimulating as a child. Was just like, what is that person doing and why? Or what are they saying to me and why? Or what is going on? And I think it's just because Nigerians have such incredibly loud personalities. And so I think, growing up in Lagos, and I was there until I was 6, I can see how the most fascinating thing would have just been like, what is going on with that auntie, for God's sake? Because I've been talking to a friend of mine recently who's similar autistic. In so many ways we're similar, but one of the big distinctions is she has almost no interest in people, and has sort of, built her whole life with an obsession around reading and writing. And I have an interest in reading and writing, but not an obsession, and this obsession with people. And I was like, oh, okay, well, if I grew up in the countryside in Ireland, there was nothing going on, and it was just books, then that would have been where my entire obsession went. Whereas I think I started reading, and I was very early to do it. And then sometime a few years after I picked up my first book and was very interested, I think people then took over. And so
mhm.
if you are obsessed enough, then you will keep collecting, and you collect all sorts of interesting things about culture and psychology and neuroscience, and why people do what they do. And it all becomes this endlessly fascinating, like continuously satisfying game of like, there's another one of those types, because this thing and this thing. So if I say this, that'll probably have that reaction. And it does, yay. So
Nice. Very analytic, I figure. So you almost like a scientist, I can imagine. So you
yeah.
observe people like animal scientist sits in zoos and like study, I don't know, giraffes or wolves. I mean, so many studies were done about wolves. Weirdly enough that I know that, but yeah. So um
Absolutely. And I think it's only now that I'm learning to incorporate sort of intuition and emotion into it. Because just for a long time, it didn't feel like that was available to me. And I think, because people weren't, reflectively obvious to me what to do. Because as a child, generally, if you're neurotypical, then you don't have to think about what to do with yourself relative to another human. You just do whatever reflexively happens. And then later on, you kind of keep some behaviors and get rid of some. But mostly it's about routine and reflex. But if you don't have access to that, your body doesn't seem to know what to do relative to other people, then either A, you just like hands off the whole thing and be like, cool. And then that's where the autistic stereotype of social deficits come from. Or like me, you fall into an obsession with it and you're like, how can I build an analytic tool with the prefrontal cortex of my brain that works as well as this like intuitive cerebellum thing that's been built by literally millennia of evolution? Can I build myself a tool that works as well? And only the hubris of a child will answer like, yeah, totally, let's do it. And somehow it's kind of worked.
And that's awesome because basically you said amygdala, shut the fuck up. So only my frontal brain is gonna
Exactly.
work now.
Well, let's
So
work on it.
emotions,
Let's make a plan.
exactly. Let's make a plan, and I see a pattern, and I'm not reacting like I don't know with my feelings. I'm sure you do. You know,
Probably, yeah.
I'm yeah, yeah, yeah. But
I think I didn't have
uh,
them in the beginning, or just they didn't know what they were. So I was like, let's come back to this later. And I just put them all aside. And then thankfully, as an adult, I got a chance to be like, maybe I'll go bring those back. It's feeling a little numb here. And so now I have kind of the best of both worlds, which I'm very grateful for. But the analytical understanding is still there. But these days, I think I am moving more intuitively and more kind of emotionally as well. So it's pretty cool.
yeah, it's wonderful and quite awesome, I think, because the analytical part is something that you have to learn, like most people have to learn. Um, for example, when going through a therapeutical training or when you become a coach or something, like for most people, I feel this is the hardest part. And like turning on your empathy, that's one thing. Most people can do that with a little training, but then really like developing an eye for patterns and recognizing them while talking to people, talking about subjects and everything. For most people, this is quite hard. And to you, this was like the first thing to do. And that's wonderful. So
Yeah,
I'm
I think
pretty
that's
impressed,
always
actually.
the irony, I guess, of disability or the opportunity that's there, where if there isn't like a certain amount of capacity already there by default, then you just jump straight to the trying version of things, and then that becomes your baseline versus when things sort of already work, and then someone's now
Mhm.
like, forget everything you know, let's learn this other thing, and you're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and I think about that all the time, how difficult it would be if you know what the automatic version of something is, or you're used to it happening automatically, to now have to like stop and like manually learn what's happening while it's happening. And I had to think about that a lot because it took me a while to understand why nobody else was as excited. Well, not nobody else, but a few people as excited about the patterns of human behavior. And just me, like a little golem in the corner, be like, and see, it's because he's a child of divorce. That's why he says these things. And everyone's like, okay, cool. And I'm like, okay, I get it. It's not it's not as exciting when you have other options like a fully functioning, shiny, evolutionally developed instinctual understanding of what to do with your body relative to other human beings. When you don't get that, consolation prize is you can become really obsessed and then become an analytical genius at it. That's kind of sick.
And I think it's wonderful because I feel like your child version or your former version, like little Daisy, already had a look into the future, knowing that the next generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are so more used to talking about emotions and patterns that you develop from your upbringing and everything. So it feels like you as a little girl knew exactly where to go.
True. It's one of those getting very lucky by how things play out because I kind of born into a generation where we're in a social context that is too complicated for our reflexes to work. And we hear this all the time. We're living in a world now that is not suited to our base kind of evolutionarily derived capacities because the world is no longer organic. It's now something much more complex. And that definitely goes to how densely interconnected we now are and how different we still are. And so to be able to make sense of the sheer amount of information that's happening anytime any two people come together is now more than your reflexes can do. And so now everybody has to now come learn the thing that I had to do at all in order to get sort of anything at all done. And now I'm like, oh, this is nice. I'm like, everyone's now into my fun special subject.
Wonderful. All the emotional nerds coming together in one place. Yay! And we understand each other. Isn't that
You know,
nice?
the fun language to use. I mean, and it's really cool. And I think also so the kind of the consequences that come from that, right? Because I think once you when you know whenever it happens to you and you do end up studying human behavior analytically, there's so many things that are so immediately obvious, so many errors of reflex and mismatches between instincts and the right answer that are so obvious to you. And then the world can sometimes kind of be this really alienating place because you're like, but don't you see? And we were like, no, they don't. And now increasingly you're like, oh no, they do see. Oh, okay. Oh, this is nice. Look at that. That is the correct answer to that situation. Oh my God, people are solving things. This is
Yes.
really something to see. So I'm very curious to see where it goes. But I think watching the ripple effects of this kind of knowledge and capacity developing is just, it's really cool. I think I'm really glad to have been born in the here and now.
Hmm.
For that
Yeah, I
reason.
totally agree. Absolutely. So let's stick a little bit longer with patterns,
Mhm.
because when you want to change your behavior, I mean, that's probably something that your colleagues or coworkers come to you and say, like, "Hey, I'm at this and that place, and how can I do it differently?" So, changing one's behavior is also knowing or recognizing your own patterns. And how do you help people actually to recognize your own feelings and your own patterns? And then in the next step, how do you help them or support them to really change the resulting behavior? That's quite a
Yeah.
step. So,
No, for sure. And you're right. And this is the fun of it really, because people come to you with their here and now experience. I feel stressed, or I feel out of balance, or I feel out of sync with my colleagues, or whatever it is. Um, but what are the ingredients and how do they combine together bit is the bit they're missing. And for me, this is the only thing that's really interesting, technically speaking, because someone's experience can't really be interesting to you. At most, you can sympathize with it then and offer comfort, but there's no games to be played there, because that's not a game. That's just, this is how it feels. But the place where there is intellectual gameplay to be is like, ooh, okay, what are the pieces, and then how do they arrange together? And I think what helped, and then because I am so sort of compulsively interested in that, because for most of my life that's been a survival skill, to be able to figure out what are the ingredients, how they combine together, used to be the only way I could figure out where people were in the here and now, because it's only now that people now come and they're like, here you go, here's how I'm feeling. Because before, most of your life that isn't information people readily give to you, so you trying to figure out how they're feeling from the ingredients and how they must combine used to just be something that I did all the time out of compulsion. And now I find that I don't have to do it all the time, but at least I employ it in this context. And when I have that picture, I'm very excited to have it, and I'm very excited to give it to them. And people are very excited to get it too, because that's why they came here. Or to be fair, even if they didn't think that they came here for an explanation and they just came here for relief, then they at least understand that the explanation is the way to relief. And so people being really receptive to it definitely helps. So then that way, all I really have to do is articulate the picture that I'm seeing and why it is. And I think for behavior, it will always come down to environmental pressures or internal pressures. And so being able to show people, well, this thing that you're doing over and over again has a reason. There is always a preceding cause to anything. And this reason is, well, your environment kind of requires you to be doing this behavior, and this is the way you know to do it. So that's why you're doing it over and over again. So let's change something in your environment so that this behavior that you don't want isn't being asked of you over and over again, because ask and do, that's how humans operate. Or it's not your environment, it's that this is satisfying you in some way. Here's how this thing that actually you don't like on this level because it compromises your principles or whatever, you do like on this level because it makes you feel X or gives you relief from Y other thing. So I think it's the seeing the picture in a way then that makes it clear for me. And now it's easier than it used to be in the past, because before I would be deducing and then not have anything to like confirm or deny. So I'd be like, well, here's my picture. The people would be like, I don't agree with you. Whereas now, because we're starting with, they're like, well, I feel this, or I want this, or I don't want this. I have something. And then when I can say, okay, well, these are the ingredients and they combine together. And if they combine in this way, someone would feel this. Then I'm like, well, these match. You said you felt this way. I thought about a way in which the factors of your life, as I understand them now, would combine together to create this pattern. So because they both match, you kind of have to agree with me. So at least let's start there. And then only if that proves to not work, then we come back and come up with a different construction of what's going on. But yeah, I think that's the how. The At least for me, that's my approach anyway. The here's the story that I see playing out, or here's the environmental factors or internal factors. And so here's what we should do differently. And then we go from there.
Mm. Yeah, that's very similar to what I do and many people I know do in coaching. So, you listen to what your coachee, for example, tells you, like what I don't like right now or what I would like to change, and then you first check, okay, what is now? So let's see what's the status quo, where are you in? And so really understanding something and seeing like puzzle pieces that then in the end hopefully give a complete picture. And then you can also start like reassembling or making new pictures and creating a new puzzle for a life that suits you better. So yeah, I totally get that. And I think that's a very useful approach to do that, because it always gives the person you are talking to the ability to say, no, I see it differently, or because they don't have to agree with you, right? So it's just guessing from our side, on
It
your
gets
side or
very
my side.
collaborative, because especially as you walk people through what you're doing, you're like, okay, we're trying to get back to here. So these are the factors that feel like they're at play. It's, this important human need plus this behavior from your manager plus this other things. I'm like, okay, cool. And then they might be like, no, you're also missing this. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's throw that in as well. And then you start constructing like, well, they did, if this and this and this happened, then that's what the environment is demanding. And then they can keep, and it becomes the whole thing also, I think, switches people from being just in experiential mode in terms of feeling whatever the end consequences of this situation as the emotional experience, to now being in like creative mode, thinking mode, action mode. They're getting to do something with all of that stress that is circulating in their body in response to how much they don't like the situation. They're now using it to feed critical thinking, etc. And so they're already feeling better, because now suddenly they're a person with agency again. They have options. There's an explanation for what's going on. There's a way through. And so you're already getting a very different experience for the person happening. So that's already a benefit. And then now also you have everything you need to get there, because you have all the pieces of the puzzle you can't see yourself. Now you can get it from the person because they're working with you on making sense of what's going on.
And then the people can start gaining back the control, right? And this is always something that we need. So we need to have the feeling to really that we can shape and design our lives ourselves, and not like being designed or being like, yeah,
Yeah,
being
just
like
having
a play ball or something.
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Um, so we got a check mark on patterns. That's wonderful. When I look at my teams that are like 99% agile teams, I see that people really work closely together usually, and they get to know each other very well because they work together every day and they meet every day, and they see each other in like different days, different emotional states and everything. So still they not always talk about it, so they have a feeling for it but they not always talk about it. What is your recommendation? So what do you think should every team let it be agile or not do to support their well-being?
So I think a couple of things. The first is just having a space and time that's dedicated to reflecting on, relating to each other and how it's going. So in spending a lot of time together and working closely together, they are doing the relating, but they're not thinking or talking about the relating. That's an entirely separate activity. And so if you don't have space and time carved out for that activity, then it isn't happening. So any of the like bonds that would be affirmed by talking about the relating that had happened, any of the information that would be learned about people, about their boundaries, about what really makes them tick, how they really like to be engaged with. None of that gets to come out if there isn't space and time for it. So whether that's every month there's a happy hour and this is all they do, if they're a remote team, it can literally just be a monthly call. The only thing to get to do is to talk about how are things going, what did you like, what did you not like. That's where stuff like, okay, it's not a big deal, but you said this thing and it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't really like when people call me that. It's not a big deal, but it's not for me. Or, hey, you did this thing and I actually have to say it did this, had this effect on me. So that's what you work towards to get to the point where both constructive as well as praise information can be shared. But at the beginning, just leaning into the praise, like at the very least, shout each other out for what you have done relationally that mattered, that made the difference, that was good, and we want you to repeat it, because those are where we learn how to keep relating to each other better. It also invests us in relating to each other, because now there's a little bit of a goal, and like we're human beings, we love a goal. And so knowing that you can be an even better colleague like kind of is a drive when you're getting that affirmation, you're getting that praise, you're getting that gratitude for doing it. So a space that is for getting to talk about how relating is going is the first and most important thing, because everything else can kind of come out of that. But more specifically, I think the biggest thing is just creating a culture of shout outs, creating a culture of celebrating in each other what you find good and valuable about the time that you're relating to each other. Because that baked into that is the reflection, first of all, because if there is an expectation on you to find someone to credit or to really notice when someone's done something so that you can shout them out, then you are training yourself to reflect on what people are doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and how it's making you feel. Then to express it is encouraging for both that individual you're directly talking to and everybody else to continue and double down on that behavior, et cetera. And so that's something that can already be done even before this, regular get together can be arranged. It can just be normalizing that, saying it's a thing that everyone's going to lean into trying to do, encourage all the managers to also do it themselves, by modeling the behavior first, and then continuing from there. So those are two very simple things that sort of create the reflection behavior that you need to be able to get the like good out of relating quite often, because it's all in there and it's filled with potential. The meeting of people regularly already has all the potential for deep bonds, but those can't be actualized until there is this space of reflection and of congratulating or celebrating what's good and constructively criticizing then what can be improved on.
Mm. I really love the fact that you start with the things that work out, that already are good and positive, because that's how you get people into the boat, right? So that's how everybody loves to get a compliment. And
And you can very much start putting the picture together from that alone. So quite often, in knowing what someone's really praising you for, then you really do start getting a picture of, well, this really matters. And the kind of person this really matters to probably doesn't like this other thing. And so quite often you are, because some people can see it as like, oh, you're coddling people, you're coddling people. You're like, well, no, the positive information is as valuable, if not more. It's easier to swallow, but it is no less valuable for being easier. And then at the other end, it does eventually then build the muscle anywhere, the comfort for being able to say the things that are blunt and uncomfortable, even if they need to be. But I always say start with what's working and what's good about being in that team, and everything else will come from there.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I love it because you need to create a safe space, right? And this will never be there when we start like with the bad stuff, with the things that are not working. We have to talk about them, absolutely, and I think a good team's only a team that also can engage in conflict and resolve it afterwards, because otherwise we're creating some very artificial harmony that is can become very toxic, but you need to start somewhere, and starting with a good thing and reinforcing good, nice behavior. It's always something that people appreciate, I think, and they learn something about themselves and how they're seen in the team. And there's a saying in dog training. I'm not comparing humans to
We're not
dogs, but
very far apart, so it's valid if you do on occasion.
exactly. So classic conditioning, it works with all mammals, so and also birds and everything. But whatever. So you have to reinforce the things that are good, and good stuff that is reinforced will show up more often. And this is also something that we can reach by pointing out the good stuff and what's working.
And it's also about doing it with depth, right? If you just say really shallowly, oh, this was great, I loved it, that's one thing, versus you saying, this was important because this and because that. Because when you go into that detail, you are also giving the information relevant to a negative experience. Because if you're saying it was, it really, really mattered to me when you went out of your way to do this, or you covered for me in this, because I'm a person who gets stressed out in this situation and often finds it difficult to help. And some people, wouldn't have been proactive, but might have waited for me to ask. But you not doing that really made the difference. Now, suddenly, it's not only like, yay, I did well. I now also know if I had done the opposite, that would have really sucked for this person. So the next time I will purposely avoid, waiting for them to come and ask me for help if I see signs that they're like starting to spin a bit. So if we use the opportunity of sharing the shout out, of sharing the compliment, as one to also be open and vulnerable about what's important to us and why the thing that had a good impact on us had that good impact, what the opposite situation might have looked like, then we are doing what we want to do. We're getting the thing that we hope to get out of conflict discussions, which is deeper understanding about each other and about how we should treat each other, how we want to be treated in order to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you like explain a little bit why you liked some behavior that much, it becomes more real, right? It's not this shallow, yay, great job, team. No, like, great job because la la la. La." So, and like naming real examples and like reciting situations that everybody observed. So it makes it real and makes it, yeah, more believable, I think. So yeah, that is, I think, a very useful step for opening up the space for vulnerability, and then also like sharing harder stuff, emotional things that you usually maybe not share with your coworkers.
Because I think at the end of the day, when we keep in mind what can happen from the sharing, when we know why this stuff matters, why it's not here's you giving information about yourself for no reason to this semi stranger. It's rather here's you equipping this person to do the thing that you're asking them to do. Because what you're asking them to do is treat you in the way you like to be treated, treat you in the way that makes you your most creative self, that makes you your most, here and present and non-brain foggy self, that makes you like all of the things that you are asking of them. You need to give them some equipment to do that job well. You can't keep setting them up for failure, which is, hey, operate in the dark, have no real clue who I am or what you need to do. And when you fail, I'm either going to not tell you and become even distant and resentful, or I'm going to tell you and you only get criticism. I'm like, could we not do better? Maybe there's a different approach, like give them what they need so that then they don't have to let you down over and over again. When you frame it that way, I think sometimes people are a little bit better at being like, okay, I owe this. This is important. This is necessary. It's not trivial. It's not just, I remember there's like this old Nigerian phrase like, oh, you want me to open my wrapper in the market, which is you want me to like take my clothes off in the middle of the street. I'm like, that's not what I'm asking of you. I'm just asking you to give the person the information they need so that they can do what you have asked of them implicitly by entering into this relationship. You're asking them to treat you well. So tell them what
Yeah.
they need to know so that they could do that.
So here's a little manual for myself. So in
Exactly.
terms of like that, so
Honestly, the
if
dream
you
of
look at us like,
everyone has a Wikipedia page, and it's like and it's like every single human being. It's not about fame. It's about here's your early life. Here are the influences. Here's what they read. Here are some of the things they've tried to do, and you're like, okay. cool, now I know what I should say and not say to this person. Like, I'm like, why is this not a thing? Why are people just winging it and then getting it wrong all the time? Because obviously it's too much to just do on reflex and hope for the best. People come from all sorts of different backgrounds with all sorts of different influences and all sorts of different ideas that have shaped them. So you have to learn each one kind of, and you'll find
Yeah.
patterns that'll make it a lot easier. But yeah, us exchanging clear information and willingness to learn with each other is the only way. And there's no shortcut, there's no other way. The upside is that when you start doing it, it's really fun. So it's not actually all that hard once you get into it, and once you realize that that is the point. That is what relating means, is
Yeah.
finding the complexity. That's what makes it good and rich and interesting.
Everything gets better once you start understanding yourself, and then also I have the capacity to start understanding your coworkers, for example, and friends and family and everything. So,
It's wild.
but
It's like
still,
sitting to play a game and you have no idea how it works, and you keep being like, "I wonder why this isn't fun." You're like, "Because you don't know what's going on. Of course, it sucks."
exactly, how should it be otherwise, right? So, the shorts in between. What are your top three tips to establish or keep boundaries?
Really know your own preferences. If you're on the fence, choose you. You'll know the people who should be closest to you by how easy it is to communicate your boundaries.
What is the biggest benefit of taking care of the emotional and mental health of employees?
Employees who aren't mentally unwell can do creative work, including problem solving.
Please complete the following sentence. If I wouldn't do the job that I'm doing currently, then.
I would be a model at a massage school that you practice techniques on so that I can get a minimum of 5 hours of massage a day.
And now we continue our conversation. But still, I think it's changing. But talking about mental health, like when I look at my parents' generation, for example, or also even in our generation, it's not really normal like to talk about your emotions, your feelings, your mental health in a workplace setting. And I think some people are still hesitant to talk about it, even if we are spending hours and hours of our time with our colleagues. So, how do you deal with this resistance and skepticism? Do you experience it at all? And if yes, how do you deal with it?
For sure, like it's always there, and I think there's a spectrum, right? But I think even the people who are most comfortable to say to come and talk to me because I've built some trust or there's an expectation that they should, even they will have some degree of resistance, and whether that's both with me and then also with the idea that I'm sharing it with someone else. Because as a practice, I always try and redirect people. I'm like, I will never go tell anything else, but you should always go tell whoever else is involved so that this can move forward, whatever that is. And so that resistance I come up with a lot. And there are definitely people way at the other end of the spectrum who are like, I don't really know if this is the thing that work should be involved in at all. There's like private life and professional life, and these things are different, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think what really helps me is explaining one, what this information actually is. So instead of just seeing it as this is my deep dark secret, it's like, no, this is just the truth about yourself. That's really important in order for the people who are trying to engage with you to do so well, and to honor, and they can't honor what they don't know. So how can we get you more comfortable with this information yourself? And then when that is true, it is less frightening to share it with anyone else, because the basis of that discomfort with sharing things or fear is that you consider this to be bad information. And so anybody having this about you has bad information, or at least something dangerous, dirty, or in some way off-putting. Whereas when it becomes something, when you can get people to that aha moment of like, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, I get it now. Or, and then it transforms a little bit their whole relationship to that information about themselves. You're not carrying a shame because something terrible happened in your life. And then now you're having to run around and do a bunch of things and then also have to work. That's not, you didn't do anything. There's something wrong with you that something terrible happened. There's just this thing. So making that comfort happen, a mix of one, just the act of talking out loud about something already changes it from this unspeakable, because now you've spoken it, so it's not that unspeakable. Um, and then the me sort of normalizing it, contextualizing it, not judging it, affirming, how they got to where they are and why that's really valid and why that's something that not only can happen, but does happen to lots of other people and why that's the case. And that's generally the journey. And then in terms of the sort of more broader skepticism, like should this be mixing with work? Is this like bringing other things that should be separated out? It's really helpful to remind people that we're in a very unique situation where the work that is necessary for a company like ours, really for any startup, is work you can't force. Problem solving or creative thinking, when they're both the same thing, cannot be forced. It can only come as a result of, let's functional mental health, at least, even if not great mental health. The really good stuff comes from great mental health, but functional. And to be functional requires these blockages cleared, requires you being able to relate to other people properly, requires you figuring out your triggers so that you know why it is that that person's words made you feel this way, which then made you do this thing. Like being able to show people that this is not a we're busybodies poking our nose where it doesn't belong, but this is just a this is what it means to have to look after people in order that they would be able to do the work that we're asking of them. If you aren't in a headspace where you can think critically, communicate effectively, think creatively, think resiliently, which is to keep going back to a problem that has been unsolved. If you can't do that, then you can't work here, and you can't do that if you're not well, if there isn't any space for you to go and unpick what's happening. So combining both of those is that is the recipe. And sort of each time I apply it, it varies slightly depending on the person, but it's generally those are the two things to try and articulate to people: this is our business, even from a purely selfish perspective, and also this is good information. You should be, if you can't be proud of it, you can be neutral about it. It's just a thing that is true about you being you. And the more people, or the more relevant people that are involved, then the more that the outcome you want can happen. And just being able to continuously affirm that gets the job done one way or another. And so yeah, that's been the helpful part. The
Yeah.
yeah, amenability of people to this stuff has been very, very helpful. Like I've been doing this work, but I haven't had to do it on hard mode. Like I'm not fighting to get people to listen to me at all or to believe me at all. I'm lucky that there's like a sort of the starting point is quite a high level of at least awareness of the broad kind of logic of what I'm trying to do and the why. And so that's kind of nice.
Yeah, that I mean, you can start at some very different point. Like it's not hard skepticism, but like maybe some fear or shame or whatever. But it's not like, what are you doing here? Is this even a job?
And I definitely know enough of what that one is like that it's not like I can't imagine it. I can imagine that all too well. And so to be here is really great. And even here and there in the space of people that I know in other environments could have been in the what are you even doing here cohort. But now in this environment are like, God, everybody else seems to really think this makes sense. So then even their skepticism becomes like quite soft edged. And so it's more like, are you sure that this is sustainable? That's a lot for one person to do. Are you sure we have to? What if people already have other spaces? I remember at some point I was like, look, if the argument that you're making for why we don't have to do it is that everyone has really, really robust in like self-awareness, self-care, and therapeutic practices in their day-to-day life, they're like, I love the optimism with which you move through the world. I love your vision of the world, but we're not there yet. And so we're
And
compensating.
we will probably never be, but
Right? But I was like, you see that now you backed yourself into a this is valid, this is necessary, this is important, but people are already fine. And I'm like, they're not though. So it really sounds like their company should step in and close the gap if we want them to be that in order for them to do their jobs. So it's always great when you get to like if you're a person who likes debating and likes arguing, when you get to have your favorite arguments but on easy mode because everyone's kind of halfway to convinced already.
that's nice. Yeah, and I mean it already gives you leverage, right? So, okay, we agreed on the goal, so at least here we are on the same page. So,
Exactly. Whereas there's definitely rooms right now where people are fully like, what does that have to do with anything? What does creative thinking have to do with mental health or mental wellness? And you're like, Okay. How do I explain why the sky is blue? Okay, let me try because it's a fact so simple that actually it's quite complicated to try and explain. But
Exactly, because it seems so obvious,
right?
but yeah.
I don't even know
Yeah.
how you're proving this. And then you do, and you're like, okay, maybe it's better just to be in rooms where it's not quite so difficult and then let those spaces form inspiration for others. And I'm really excited for like as the company grows and employer branding becomes more part of what's necessary to do, getting to, essentially for it to be an ambassador for functioning like this because it is doing all of the predicted things. The company is thriving as a result of really low churn on the employee side, really high collaboration, like all of the things that you stereotypically say will result from this, like are happening to the surprise of no one. Well, maybe even actually even me a little bit. Sometimes you're like, I know it works, but it's crazy that it works. And so that's all really cool. And so getting to and also already every time we have to tell our story, whether that's prospective investors, et cetera, they're blown away by all of these and it all being related at the end of the day to culture. And so the more that is a discussed story, the more that will have impact on companies of a similar size and nature. So I'm really looking forward to that too.
Yeah, it's gonna spread. Like in 5 or 10 years, I don't know, every startup should
Right,
have
because
like
it
an
just makes sense. It's a
it
no-brainer.
does. Yeah, absolutely. So word goes out to all people founding new companies. So hire a mental coach and help sponsors.
And this is
Well,
too where I think where a lot of wonderful innovations and social innovations come out anyway is when the interests of capital at the end of the day, or the interests of productivity align also with human interests. And sort of, we saw versions of this when, in order to keep factories functioning properly, breakfast just made sense. If people don't eat well in the morning, they can't do well. And suddenly the biggest proponents for breakfast foods are all these random factory owners. And that's how we get Kellogg's and all of these things. And they're just like, you got to feed the people. And they're like, that's a great idea. And you're like, oh, so they can work. You're like, you know what? That's fine. You got me in the first half. I'll take it. I'll take it. Let's go. And now you're like, you got to look after the people's mental health. You're like, so they'll work. You know what? I'll take it. It's still the thing. So that's
and
still
it's even easier when you have the numbers, right? Like when you say there's not so much fluctuation at our place, people stay longer because they feel happy, because they really can show their talents and develop themselves and grow. And by the way, we have wonderful business results and we're also growing on financial
yeah.
side. So, all
I'm
right,
like,
everybody wins, I
where's the complaint? Where's the issue? And they're like, oh, I guess it makes sense. Crazy.
guess. It worked out. Wonderful.
And I think at the end of the day, people who don't get this or don't do this, company's not doing this, it tends not to come from a place of malice. It just comes from like a profound lack of imagination. Like they cannot believe that this is how human beings operate, and so they're like, it just can't be true. There's no way that that's the case. Let's instead go with oversight or repressive policies or like really strict rules and try and force people to do things. And I think in a way, I get where that ignorance comes from because if you don't spend your time obsessively studying people, you won't notice some of the patterns that are quite subtle, like how much people love doing stuff. We're such a fiddly species. We're like those cute little monkeys that can't keep still and are always doing something. Like that's us, and that's what we look like when we're happy, we're healthy, and when the thing makes sense on some level or is interesting or is having an outcome that doesn't make us, sick to our stomach. We like doing stuff. And so if you want people to do things, then it's about making it make sense to them, making sure that the baseline is there for them to be the version of a human being who likes to do things, which is our normal default version. And then, making sure they get what it is they're supposed to do. You do those things, that's it. And so now, when we do our surveys, we know also what it is we're asking each time. We're asking for alignment. Do you feel like you get what's going on here and your part and what it has to do with anything and what's expected of you? Okay, cool. Do you feel like, this environment's working, the way it's set up and everything is nurturing you so that you can do the thing that you understand and are aligned to do? Cool. All right, let's go.
It sounds so easy, yet it's hard work.
Yeah, it is, but it's satisfying. And I think for a lot of us, we've experienced what it's like for work to kind of not make sense, for it to be decoupled a little
Yeah.
bit from like reason, where you're like you're doing the thing, kind of either you can't quite see how it all fits in, or you're not sure the thing that you're doing is true, or the premise of what you're doing is true, but you're like, whatever, it's work. And so to be someone where you're like, this is just common sense that I've been long told is untrue by people who couldn't imagine it. And now like someone's like, go for it. Like if you think it's true, go, and you're like, yes.
Yeah, I see that because when I started working like in a more professional way, not like tutoring as a school person or something, but like getting a real job, so to say. Um, Work really felt stressful, like always, and always a little bit like a pain, and not like a place where I can share and be myself fully. And then I discovered Agile, and somehow I learned, wow, there's a different world. And there are people who don't really make this artificial division between professional and personal life and everything. So I think, at least what I can say from my experience, is that mm, I had to see it with my own eyes that it's possible, really. And yeah, so this is also why leading by example is so powerful, because you see what can be done differently. And this really gets us because we are monkeys and we learn by observing.
We see
So
monkey do, and it's just, and this is what representation talk is about at its core. It's just people get confused and lost in the terminology, but to be able to show people what can be is the only way for people to process internally that truth and then work accordingly, because you can't imagine what you can't conceive of. Every image that you bring up in your mind you got from somewhere, and so if you don't have it, it's not there. And so it doesn't matter how simple one considers the logic to be. If it's only simple because you have the images to combine in that direction and then they don't, it's not simple for them. And so I'm really, really excited at how many more examples people are starting to see of various very useful truths, whether that's truths about going on one's personal journey to understand yourself and heal if that's what needs to happen, or just simply take responsibility for yourself if that needs to happen. People seeing each other do that and model to each other what that can look like on social media, whether that's organizations starting to do things differently and people seeing the effects of that, whether it's just having a conversation with your friends and 3 out of 5 are like, yeah, I like my job, actually. I like the people I work with, it's great. Just transforming that myth of there's no such thing as liking your job. And for a while we were all just like, yeah, of course, work should be horrible. It should be horrible, you should be miserable. And those are the rules. And you're like, that doesn't seem like that should be true or has to be true. It's like, why would that be a fundamental truth of the universe? That work is horrible, that feels constructed. I think we can change our minds about that.
yeah,
And it's all
yeah,
becoming a little bit easier because those are the stories we're starting to tell more often. And I think that that's true on every level. And I was talking to somebody recently where I was like, I think this is why it's such an interesting time to be an artist, to have any hand in art or creativity, where like the work now is modeling happy endings, modeling possible futures. It's reminding people of all of the good that's doable. Because for so long I think we're working so hard to prove to people that there was work still to do, that all we had were stories of how terrible everything is and how horrible it all is and how much suffering there is. And people are like, oh, so you're saying it's cool, everything's bad and nothing means anything, so let's just carry on. You're like, no, 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 everything is bad. Some things are bad, but it can be fixed, I promise. Come back for part two. And then now it's like, see, here's what this utopia looks like. Here's what a family after the therapy looks like. Here's the happy ending for these two couples. Here are stories where things get fixed and things are returned to what they could be. And I think all of that inspiration, all of that leading by example, will keep rippling, especially in our time of information commoditization and like intense sharing of content with each other. So it's having also these, exponential kind of speeds of moving, I guess, through the population. So very interesting to see what impacts that has, what that looks like. What does the world of work look like in a few years? What does politics, what does interrelations between people on a local level, what does all of it look like when people are learning new and better behaviors of socialness, of being social, I suppose.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's I'm optimistic for the first time in a very long time, I think, partly because of doing this work and getting to have proof, I guess, like we say, representational proof that the theories are true. Because even when you really, really believe something, because all the logic holds on paper, you're still like, but maybe the naysayers are right. But now you're like, holy shit, it really was that easy. Oh my God. It really is that simple. Okay, cool. That's great
Yeah.
sharing.
And you see real examples, right? This makes all the difference. So reading one thing and being able, or believing it and being able to understand it on a logical level, maybe even feeling it, okay, that's only one thing. But then like seeing it, proving the story to become real, yeah, that's the thing
That's knowing.
exactly.
That's what knowing looks like. And then suddenly all the energy that you're spending wondering or repicking the theory or being like, maybe it's not true, whatever, that goes away. And all of that now, like recouped energy is spent then on seeing more opportunities. Suddenly you're like, oh, if I say this thing and this thing, that results in that. Oh, what about this thing? And it's all just, oh, it's the best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's such a good feeling when things come together, definitely. So you've seen a lot of things work. That's wonderful because you give a lot of yourself and also like being very open, being vulnerable yourself. So I imagine that your work can be very fulfilling, but also very challenging and maybe draining sometimes. So, how do you keep yourself sane, happy, fit for work? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I get it a lot, which is also itself nice that people are always very concerned about my own well-being and all of this. And I think for me it's twofold. I think one of it is being really comfortable with negative, not even negative emotions. Increasingly, I'm trying to find a better description for that that is less that has less, weird
Judgment.
connotations. But yeah, having being comfortable with all emotions and being comfortable with the truth of the world as it is. And I think because I already had to do that for myself, because my own personal story had implications of so much sadness and so much pain, etc. And there's no way for me to be unaware of the general truths of the world and all the negativity that includes. I'd already had practice in like, you just sit with it. If the thing that you're thinking about makes you sad, you sit with it. If the thing that you're hearing about reminds you that suffering exists in the world, okay, you sit with it. And then you do the thing that lets you process it, and then you carry on. And so for me, there were kind of three places emotionally that hearing or absorbing someone's difficult emotion can do. One of those, like sort of, the most extreme one is that it triggers something for me. It speaks to a specific wound that I've personally experienced or a pain that I have. And so it brings up the grief for that, in which case that's okay because I know what to do when my grief comes up. And maybe I'll like go for a walk and listen to really sad music and just like have a really good cry. That's so satisfying. It is almost as good as a really good laugh.
It
Or
is.
maybe I will go for a cycle, or maybe I will just go and talk to a friend who also gets that particular thing and we'll grieve together. But whatever it is, I don't mind if that's what ends up happening as a result. Or it's level two. It doesn't all the way quite trigger a thing directly to me, but it reminds me about the truth of the world around me. It reminds me that somewhere people are oppressed, or somewhere someone is being victimized for their identity, somewhere someone's misunderstood and alienated. And then that's not quite, okay, I have grief I have to feel, but it's a heaviness. And then the question is, what do I want to do with that? So maybe I will use that as an excuse to go find something I should donate to. Maybe I'll use that as an excuse to go like lean in and read more about the subject that this kind of makes me think about. And then that's okay, because it's okay for the thing that you do about what's going on in the world to be that you bear witness and you look for an opportunity to see if there's any good that you can do or anything that makes it a little bit better. And then you feel a little bit less helpless, and then that's that one. Or maybe it doesn't do that either, and it's just a, doesn't this suck? Isn't it just sucky when someone is experiencing something sucky? Isn't it just sad to watch someone else be sad? And in which case, well, then okay, because I'm already getting to do something with that. I'm getting to exercise that feeling by helping them. I'm getting to think at the same time as, doesn't this suck? I'm also thinking about, isn't it so nice when someone's there when it sucks? Isn't it so nice that I'm getting to be here for them? Isn't this lovely? And then I'm as filled with all of these like, oh, this is good. It's cool that as human beings, we came up with this in the first place, that we were like, oh, that's what you do with that pain. doesn't exist anywhere but does exist, the one that you cannot see, you go give it to another person. And like, that's a cool idea. Whoever came up with that first, like, hats off. And then we kept teaching each other to do it. And now I'm getting to do it. I'm like, that's a lot. So I think that's mostly what it is that there's nothing it could bring up for me that I don't have some way of relating to or engaging with that I value enough to not, mind that that's come up. And then I think the other element as well is generally like just having good care practice for myself, just looking after myself in general, being broadly well rested. Like so much of this role allows you to like lean either into incredibly unhealthy behaviors, like I could always do more. I could fill up my whole schedule. I could talk to 17 people a day instead of like five or so. Like I could do all of this in the name of caring, or I could recognize that I owe it to myself to be as well as possible. And then from that full well, do my best work and then limit the actual amount of times I speak to people or number of people I speak to, or limit the amount of things I follow through with, because that took me a really long time to piece together as a habit. Because again, one of the fun, like autism things is just like in your knowledge is like stored on this like network graph type thing. Everything is connected to everything in my mind. And so if I'm thinking about a problem area, then I will probably think about every single solution that one could have to that problem. And in the past, I would just follow through with all of those as projects, and I would do 15 things when actually two would have been enough, either for my employers to feel like I'm being valuable, or for the problem to be impacted. But I didn't know how to see that. I was like, how do you pick the two out of the 17? They all seem equally valid. And also, I'm already doing them. It's too late. Whereas now being able to be like, that is a good idea, but it's not, I'm already doing one thing. I've already done, two things. There's no need for this other thing. And I think that that's been a huge help so that I myself am at my best, so that I can to carry the things. And then the things themselves, I am comfortable experiencing when they come up.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing. That was very deep, actually. So,
Yes.
um, what really stuck with me is the first part, because I'm also constantly learning, still learning about it, is accepting what is.
Mhm.
So just accept that feelings are there, accept that disharmony is there, that struggle is there, whatever, and then just let it be for a second or a minute or a month or whatever it needs, and then see how it develops and how you deal with it,
Yeah,
basically. And then all the other stuff comes back, and like whatever you need, go for a walk, meet a friend, go to the gym, just lay down on the couch, have a good cry, like one
right?
tear
Like when you're not
releases
fighting
when
and
you
you're
have
just like,
stress.
oh, that's what that is.
Okay.
Hey, grief. Hey, random dull anger. Hey,
Yeah.
frustration. You're like, all right. And rituals. I think rituals as well is the other thing. Because I think sometimes when people hear talks like this and like, oh, it's all well and good just saying that. Some people are just more zen than other people. Maybe you can. And I'm like, I'm not ignoring anything. It's that I have rituals that are attached to different emotional states. And then the ritual is in such a way that I almost like doing that thing. And so it makes, there's no resistance to it, because even if I'm not like, yay, it's my favorite thing, I like it on some level. Like I really like a good cry because I've managed to build really nice rituals or routines in relation to it that I enjoy. And the experience then of doing the thing in that way is almost positive, if not actually so. And I think that's what I would always encourage. So when people say sit with the emotions, sit is an interchangeable, it's a modular verb. Like swap it out for something else, run with it, eat with it, laugh at it, read this particular book with it, watch this particular movie with it, get a massage with it. Just swap out sit for whatever the action is and experiment with different ones. And then eventually you find one that it just clicks and you're like, you know what, this emotion plus this action, oh, that's a good combo. It's so good. I don't mind. The next time I will circle back to being in this situation again. And I think for women especially, this is so important to learn, because we are naturally built to cycle back and forth between our most elated state and our most exhausted state, or our most inflamed state. And so, like, whatever emotions that you don't enjoy, you're gonna see them again. You will meet them again in a couple of weeks. And so
Yeah, it's gonna be 25 days.
exactly. They're gonna keep showing up, figure out a way to kind of enjoy it, and then it's fine. And I think that's been the most transformational change I think I've been lucky enough to experience in like the last 2 years, I want to say maximum, that I'm like,
Mhm.
kind of like it. It's kind of nice. And like there's the heaviness that's really thoughtful. And I'm like, that's good because there's some things that I wouldn't dwell on otherwise. And those things are worth dwelling on. It's worth thinking about the heaviness of the world sometimes, because if none of us did, then no one's ever thinking about it, then nothing ever changes. And then it's worth it grieving about the intimate wounds you've experienced. Like, somehow, yes, it just is. It is nice to reflect on those things and think about them and cry the tears that come up for them, or throw the plates in anger that you whatever the thing is, because those things you experienced are deserving of your sympathies, your energies. And so I think once you start enjoying what everything you can experience feels like, then there's nothing to be afraid of. There's just making plans for when and where. And sometimes you're like, I'm not going to have that conversation on this day because that's going to do this. And so you can make plans, you can be conscious and have agency in all this, and not just like a tool for other people to use. But it's not need to run. And there's no need to
Mm.
really, yeah, there's no need to preemptively plan for so many of these things. There's only to let whatever happens afterwards happen. And if what happens is you're exhausted, then sleep. And if you're sad, then cry. And if you're angry, find someone to go yell with about whatever's happening, or go to a heavy metal context or concert. Like, there's always a thing that is proportional to what you're feeling. Go do that. And then
Yeah.
don't worry so much about what's going to come up.
Yeah, yeah, that's really nice. So really listen to yourself and then treat yourself with whatever you need to feel it and then in the end overcome it, because you never stay in one feeling
Because
forever.
it's energy. When you expend it, it's gone. Like, at first you are feeling it wherever it's happening in your body, and your awareness of that is what the emotion is. But then when you move it elsewhere, whether upwards into your mind to do it, to think, or move it through your body, then it's gone. And then that's it. You've experienced that emotion while it was around, and now it's gone. It's all just weather passing through. So, like, acknowledge it, do something with it, and then be like, oh, cool, now the sun's back out again. All right, let's go for a
Yeah.
walk or something.
Yeah, quite literally, maybe.
Exactly. I love all these TikToks that are like, I am so angry that they were right. It really does help. It's almost so annoying that something as simple and dumb as a walk is so effective for your
It's
mental
so
health.
good.
Wild. You're like, I'm like, I feel somehow embarrassed by this. I'm so simple creature that I just needed to move my little legs around for a little bit. And I'm like,
And get a little sunlight. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's what many people experienced during the pandemic, where you couldn't really do anything else but going for a walk, and meeting friends outside was the only thing for a long time to like meet people at all,
exactly.
except for online meetings, but we were all sick of it at some point. And then like in this challenging time, going actually out for a walk, moving your feet, getting some sunlight, maybe having an ice cream on your way out. Like, isn't that nice?
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
And I think that's, yeah, that's really, I think actually the pandemic has probably been one of the most impactful things that gets the least amount of attention in a very specific way, right? Like, I think, and then some of it is maybe that it's not done, the ripple effects aren't finished, but I think when people always say, oh, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the apocalypse is really just a word that means like radical shift and everything changes. There's a reason plague is one of them. And you're like, okay, yeah, anything that would shut down life as you know it, leaving then the room for life as you don't know it, which is room to do things you don't normally do, room to think about what you've been ignoring, room to finally write that book you've been not having time to do because you're running around a lot. There is a reason we always have extraordinary shifts in human understanding after, war, famine, plague, etc., because then suddenly there is stuff is just cleared away or is out of reach. And then now other things fill that space, or that introspection, or that thinking. And so I think whether whether you want to talk the plague and Isaac Newton, or whether you want to talk any of the rest of them. And I think what's interesting about our version is that it's not any one singular, here's one truth, here is heliocentrism, and actually we're not at the center of the universe. Rather, it's lots of different simultaneous realizations of collective truths. Here is actually the source of my anger. Here is actually the source of my insecurity. Here is, okay, the reason for my anxiety. Here's what I do about it. So all of this shifting and graduating from where we were, because there was all of this room to either relearn old things that had been forgotten, the joy of a walk, the enjoyment of coloring in your books or whatever it is, and then also, thinking things we wouldn't have had to think about if we had had the distractions.
Yeah. So we're almost in the topic that I really have to talk to you about. Your book, because you're also a writer, and you made the pandemic, or at least parts of it and the time afterward, as a central topic of your book. Tell us about it. So
Happy to. My favorite question. But yeah, I did because I wanted to write about transformation. I wanted to write about coming of age because I felt like that's the stage that I was personally at. Well, actually, really, I'm getting ahead of myself. Really, I just wanted to write a book. And I was like, I don't really have much, if any, imaginative capacity. If there isn't a problem to solve or a person talking to me, it's just white noise inside my head. It's very peaceful, but also kind of odd. And so I was like, I don't think I can make up a story given what I'm working with, but I have a lot of stories in my own history. I'm like, I've done nothing but live interesting lives in my 30 years so far. And I've also, used those anecdotes. I've used them as currency. I've used them in dinner parties to be funny in the room and smart and clever. So I know they're good stories. So I'm like, all right, let's gather them all and let's shape them into some sort of novel and be done with this nonsense. And so I got a spreadsheet and I was like, this is the skeleton of how a novel is supposed to be shaped. These are all the anecdotes I can think of from my own life. Let's make a book. And then at some point it became clear that I was like, actually, I don't feel like I have enough here. Then the only way to add more is either to like lean in and make this a memoir. And I was like, I don't want to write that somehow. I'm like, ew. Or
and
if
you're only 30 years old. I mean, there's so much more to come. You will have to write a second and a
exactly.
third one. So
Right? And I was like, the pressure on trying to set up a memoir at this stage. I'm like, what's the ending? Is it now? Like right now? This is the culmination? No. Okay. And so I'm like, all right, the only other option then is to write a story set in the now and then let the historical, information about myself be flashbacks. And I was like, well, what's going on in the now? I'm like, coming of age. I was like, I feel like what's going on now is me figuring out the last things I need to figure out. And that's true for the people around me as well. So I'm like, okay, let's tell that story. So that's how it became this kind of Russian nesting doll situation of all of my little cute and crazy stories of growing up and figuring things out inside a how do these four people who are kind of broadly spread across all the stereotypes of millennial culture all finish coming of age, figuring out what their deal is. So we meet the four of them just before the pandemic is announced in London. So one is the protagonist, who is the only one that I think is kind of a real plagiarized from real life situation, in that she's just a really loose caricature of myself. Because I'm happy for that to happen. So I was like, cool. And then her husband then is, I want to say, a like lazy amalgam of every white man I've ever liked. And then the protagonist's best friend then is similarly a lazy amalgam of every white woman I've ever liked. And then there's like a fourth character who is there to be the archetypal sort of the counterpart to the protagonist in a way. And so that's this autistic character who both has her own journey to go on, but also kind of functions in the story as this like Microsoft clip art type figure that just comes up to be like, have you considered this thing is the answer? What about that
very
thing?
annoying.
Only in this case, it's kind of useful because the protagonist is often the one who is sort of everybody else's Sherpa and answers to everybody else. So when she herself doesn't have any answers, she's like, "What the fuck?" And so this is the character with whom she can actually get some insights from or some clues from. But we meet them at the beginning, and all of them. Because the first part is called Verschlimmbessern. And so all of them are like, our lives are amazing. There's just like one last thing, just one last thing. We're just going to quickly switch that and be perfect. And then, of course, this is the thing that unravels one by one. And so the protagonist in her situation, she's like, I still don't really understand my body. I feel like it's just a black box. I understand my mind a lot, but I don't get my body. And not only does that mean certain like issues, like joint issues, mobility issues, but also like sexually, she's really confused, and that she's like physically quite frigid, but psychologically quite interested in sex. So she's like, there's like this stuff here to figure out, but if I can just get that done, then that'll be fine. And her husband is a startup founder who's sort of getting crazy success. They've raised a lot more money than they thought they would, et cetera. But he's having a soprano style, escalating panic problem because, of course, he never really wanted any of this. He's fundamentally alienated from his ambition. He's a white European man, and so he's been chasing something for no good reason that he doesn't
Wonderful.
want. He's built a company that kind of he hates because it doesn't look like what he wanted. It looks like what he had to do in order to keep raising more money. But none of this is he's engaged with. So he's just like, I'm just a little bit stressed. I'm going to hire some people. It'll be fine.
It's
And
gonna be better soon.
exactly,
Oh,
soon. And similarly, then the best friend character is in her like girl boss era. She's about to start a startup. She just did an MBA, so people would take her more seriously. And then she's also finally got engaged. So it's like it's all coming together. She has it all. She's like, why am I so angry all the time? She's like, it's just it's no big deal. But this like simmering frustration, this rage, this overwhelm. And I think it's because I wanted to write the female version of the same thing that's happening with Jonathan, the guy, where all of this pursuit after an impossible ideal that also doesn't necessarily represent her. It's just what you're told to pursue. And then it's only as you're starting to acquire it that you're like, why don't I feel any better? I thought I would start to feel better by now. And so we follow them. And then Neve, the character, is a writer. She's successful. And her thing is the sort of classic rich genius or sort of like young genius who's told at some point inadvertently, this is the price of genius, is that you just be miserable and misunderstood by other people. And you're like, oh, well, that is what it is. And so she takes no responsibility for making her life, at all fit for her. So she hates it, but also it's really constructed for her to hate it. It just never occurred to her that she has any agency or choices. Like lives in a city she doesn't like, working in the kind of context she doesn't really enjoy, et cetera, et cetera. And so we meet them all trying to fix if I just fix this one thing, everything will be great. Whether that's let me finish planning, my wedding and getting the startup going, let me hire more people, let me just figure out sex, whatever that is. Then the pandemic is announced. They have various different versions of their rock bottom and various different versions of their hero's quest. So everybody goes on some sort of journey. For the protagonist, Ada, that's writing the book, or writing her book and figuring things out as a result, because she has sort of in a meta version fashion a similar journey of figuring herself out in order to have fodder to write the book. Her husband goes on a literal journey on a ship and then has encounters, etc. Well, he has a sort of panic attack that means he has to leave his job. He's kind of forced out, or at least put on like leave unwillingly. So it's like his biggest shame, etc., to have been proven that he is insufficient, he is weak, all of these things, and then having to go on his journey and then figuring it out. And because I just really wanted to write a happy ending, and I was like, the only way I can do that is if I write their descent and their journey, and then write an entire part that sort of mirrors how we meet each of them. But now they're happy and not insane. And so we have a dinner party at the very beginning, and it's a dinner party at the very end. We have Jonathan going to work as the second scene. We have Jonathan going to work again as the second last scene, so that kind of thing. And so we see each of them again, but now they're like, oh, cool, this is what it's like when you heal your traumas and deal with your bullshit and take responsibility for reorchestrating your life into one that is nice and not like horribly alienating.
mm, yeah.
And
And
so,
you,
yeah, I'm very proud of it, but it's very long. It's very difficult to pull this off. I was so relieved when the manuscript itself got finished, and then they were like, "It's probably like another year of writing," and I nearly died. And they were like,
no.
that's standard, especially as I'm doing it alongside another full time thing. But it's inching away. It's getting there. It's been an extraordinary experience. I've hated most of it, but I've been very grateful for it at the same time. But I will be very very relieved and very happy when it's done, and hopefully it does some good in the world. And I think it will. I think I would have liked to read about people going through what I was going through while I was going through it, and I'm like
Yeah.
the only person who thinks that way.
At least you have one reader already won. I mean, so
Yeah,
I'm gonna read it, and I really do need to know when it's gonna be published.
I will
And
definitely
I'm,
let you know. There'll probably have to be
yeah,
more podcasting then too. But since I like yapping anyway, it's probably for the best. So I'm looking forward
yeah, absolutely.
to let you
Yeah, so
know.
Dear audience, please go to Daisy's Instagram to see her like completely losing the shit about her new books.
Definitely do. I cannot wait to be incredibly unchill about how excited I am and how proud I am of myself.
That's very relatable. So when you care so much about something and you create it, then there's the IKEA effect, you did it yourself
Yes,
because then you like it even more. So
exactly. And it's so nice that I get to produce something, like I said, in the post irony era where people are allowed to earnestly care about things again. Because I was going to do it anyway, but now people are also like, "Oh my god, bonus points for being so relatable and cool." Whereas, like, I feel like even 2 years ago, everyone's like, "Ew, you're proud of yourself? That's a bit gross."
I'm sure your book is going to be amazing and I will read it from first to last page and I'm really excited. So please let us all know and I will let the audience know
I
once it's
definitely
out.
will. Thank you. You made me so excited about it all over again. I'm like, maybe I should go write. You should just
Maybe you should.
hype me up, and then I would finally finish this stupid rewrite.
So we covered so many different topics today. I mean, we went from the pandemic at the last thing here over mental health boundaries, like at work, personally, professionally, and everything. Um, is there a topic that you think should be on this podcast in one of the next episodes? So, is there a topic that we didn't talk about today but should be talked about in the future?
I don't know what the shortest way to say it is and what the exact topic would be, but something that explores the intersection between the personal and the political. Because I feel like we still focus mental health conversations around individuals, largely speaking, when most mental health things relate to environmental structural realities, right? Political things that are true. It's our membership of a particular political category, like being a woman, for instance, that generates a lot of the things then that give rise to our traumas, our stresses, or whatever. And yet we often just still talk about them individually rather than also the other way. Ditto for being an immigrant, ditto for being a person of color, ditto for being, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that space in general and having those conversations and figuring out those conversations around how we talk about work and our political and economic structures or our political identities and the role those play in mental health and how we are navigating that or getting better at talking about that or engaging with that. I think something around that would be cool.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that inspiration. I will put all the topics that my guests name into a backlog, and some are already like worked on, so to say, because I found guests who wanted to talk about, for example, upcoming, probably beginning of the next year, is a lady talking to me about servant leadership that was actually a wish from another podcast guest. And so, yeah, so it's not just going anywhere, but I'm
Oh,
trying to find people to talk about it really.
that's
So,
very
yeah.
cool. Well, keep me posted because it's one that I would definitely like to listen.
Thank you so much for answering them like so openly. I mean, it was wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lisa. Oh, look at us.